Good morning. This morning I'm going to start a short series. It'll probably only be a few installations long. And it's going to deal with some SketchUp tricks, some things that help make creating models easier and quicker and maybe give you a little more insight into SketchUp. To start this morning, what we're going to do is concern ourselves with things like tenons and dovetail boards. And the idea being, if you draw a dovetail board and you're going to have the same tails on both ends, do you have to draw both ends of the board? Or can you draw one end of the board and use it to draw the other end of the board? Well, of course, the answer is yes. The same is true with tenons. So I'm going to show you a few tricks for how to do that. To help me, I'm going to use a tool I created called Dovetail Components. I'm going to open this tool up right now. And what this tool does is I can choose to draw either traditional draws, contemporary draws, or tailboards. Traditional draws have hard wood bottoms that slide out the back so that they can breathe with seasonal changes, expand and contract. Contemporary draws are made of plywood bottoms and they're locked in on all four sides. Tailboards are simple boards with dovetails on one or both ends. That's what I'm going to use this morning for a demonstration vehicle. So rather than draw the dovetails, I'm going to let my tool do it. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to have to move this tool over because I can't fit it all on screen. Okay, I'm going to create a board that's 4 1/8 inches wide. It's 15 inches long. Actually, I'm going to make it 14 1/2 because I'm only going to have tails on one end. I'm not going to have any bottom support because this is just a tailboard. It's not used for a draw. My front tails, right here, and notice, by the way, as I change this, the picture changes to tell me what I'm looking for. My front tails will have a 1/4 inch half pin width rather, and a 1/4 inch pin width. Have 8-degree slope on the pins or the tails. I'm going to have 4 tails, and I'm not going to have any back tails. I'm only going to have front tails. Once I've made those selections, I can now draw the tailboard, and there it is. 4 dovetails on one end, nothing on the other end. I asked it to draw a 14 1/2 inch board because I wanted this part to be 14 inches. It'd be 14 1/2 including the tails. And when I'm done and I put the tails on the other end, it'll be 15 inches. Okay, so how do I put the tails on the other end? Well, there's a number of ways. One thing I can do is copy this board using the Move Copy tool. So I hit the Control key, bring it out along the red axis, flip it along the green axis. You can't see that here. Let me see if I can bring it on screen. All right, there it is. Flip along green axis. And when I do, you notice this tailboard got flipped. And now what I can do is place this with the Move tool. Right there. And I can explode both. Okay, once I've done that, I can remake the component, but before I do, notice I've got to erase some lines. And that's because when I flipped it and realigned it, I added lines in places I didn't want them. Now I got to go and subtract these lines. Sometimes you even have to do things like add faces that may have gotten destroyed. I'll go around to the other side and do this again. And so the question is this easier than drawing the tails on the other end? Well, of course. Drawing 4 more tails on the other end, if you're doing it by hand and not using my tool, is a chore. And this is easier. Now I've got the board. I can make it a component, call it the name of the original board, same name as the original board, and it'll just replace the definition. Here's an easier way. I'm going to use my tool again to set this demonstration up, but this probably isn't the way you would do this from scratch. But I'm going to draw this board again, same board as before, and to set the demo up I'm going to explode it. I'm going to look at it from the front view, end on. And what I want to do is I want to get a 2D drawing. And one way I can do that is if I use the select tool from right to left, I can do this. Bring the select tool right up the middle of the board. Don't come over here. It's right up the middle of the board. And let go. Now you'll notice that I didn't select any of the lines on this side. I only selected the lines on this side. And I can delete them. That leaves me with a 2D drawing. All right. And when I say this was just a setup for the demo, that's all it was. What I just showed you was simply a demo, although I hope you learned a little something about the select tool. But here's what I want to show you. Suppose you were drawing this tailboard in a 2D, the 2D representation of the tailboard. And that's when you realized you wanted tails at this end of the board as well. Well, before giving it 3D dimensions, in other words, before making this a 1/2 inch, and then realizing you wanted to flip it and copy, flip it and copy it now. And first, in fact, what I'm going to do, and here's a trick, I'm going to delete this line. I'm going to copy what's left. Bring it out along the red. Flip it along green. And I'm going to move it back. Choose that endpoint right there and move it to that endpoint right there. Now I don't have a face. I can easily get the face back by drawing any line. Choose a line and draw it. And I got my face back. Once I have my face back, I can give it dimensions of a 1/2 inch and now make it a component. So thinking ahead, the previous method, I made a 3D part, I flipped it, registered it, exploded both parts, and then erased a bunch of lines. This way, thinking ahead and eliminating one line, I can flip it, add it together, create the face, and it's much easier. Okay, now we're going to try something a little harder. Suppose I didn't want this to be 14 inches. Suppose I wanted it to be 12 inches, but I drew it 14. What do I do about it? Well, there's lots of ways you can do it. One is you can erase these lines, recreate them at 12 inches, and do the flip again. I wouldn't do that. I would use the select tool in an appropriate way. I know it's 14 inches now, and I want it to be 12, so the difference is 2. What I would do is use the left to right selection. Having done that, notice that I've only selected these end lines. Now I can move them along the green axis 2 inches. Lo and behold, my board is now 12 inches long, or 13 inches tail to tail. And so resizing boards or creating multiple ends that are identical, that's fairly easy to do, but this is a few tricks that'll help you do it. You can do the same thing with a tenon or anything that has symmetrical ends. Now I'm going to show you something else, a little more complex. Let me set it up. Okay, in this case, what I had, some time ago I modeled this table, or this dresser. And recently I created a bunch of American woodworker posts and redesigned or designed this bedside table to match it. When I did that, I wanted it to look just like this. And so I used legs that were almost identical to this, except that of course the lengths are different and even the mortises are different. But beyond that, they're pretty much the same. So the question is, do I have to redraw this leg, or can I use this leg in some way? Well, to examine these things closer, let me get rid of all the parts but the legs. Notice this front leg has some dovetail sockets up here. It's got a mortise here. Look at it around back. Dovetail socket. A dado. Dovetail socket. This has the same thing. A mortise. Dado. Dovetail socket. Now the difference is these dados are 3.5 inches here. I believe they're the same up here. 3.5 inches. But the short legs, the dados are 2.25. I believe it's the same down here. 2.25. 2.25. But they're positioned in the same place. In other words, they start 4.75 from the bottom. Four and 3/4. And the same is true of the upper ones. So the lengths of those mortises are different. The lengths of the legs are different. And the legs themselves have these they have a chamfer with a lamb's tongue right at the end. You can see right here. So the question is, without redrawing these legs, can I use this leg and create it? Well, the answer is yes. And let me show you how to do that. The first thing I'm going to deal with is the mortises. So let me take and copy this front leg over here. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to make it unique so that I don't want to change these legs. So I'm going to make it unique. Now I want these to be 2 1/4 inches long. So how do I do that? Well, let's look at it from the front view. Better yet, let's look at it from the back view so I can see them. What I want to do is I want to keep this dimension from here to here the same, and this dimension from here to here the same. I essentially want to bring this one up. And the difference is 3 1/2 minus 2 1/4. And if I do the arithmetic right, 3 1/2 minus 2 1/4 is 5/4. Let me try that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into edit component mode here, use my select tool, and I'm going to judiciously select below the lamb's tongue. And notice what I've got. It selected the lamb's tongue, the top part of the mortise, and only the lines that were completely within the selection box. Now let me move them down 5/4. Let's see what I get. Along the blue axis, 5/4 of an inch. Two 1/4, which is what I wanted. Okay, now I want to do the same thing on the bottom. And here I need to capture above the lamb's tongue and the whole foot from there on down. So I go just above the lamb's tongue. I'm not in edit component mode. I must have gotten out of edit component mode accidentally. So let me go just above the lamb's tongue and move it up 5/4 along the blue axis. And here's if I don't move it along the blue axis, I get some really strange shapes. But on blue axis, and I'll type 5/4. And let's see what I've got. Now that's 2 1/4. I haven't destroyed my lamb's tongue. The lamb's tongue position relative to everything else is the same. So is this. That's the same. Now I've got a leg that's a little shorter, but still not short enough. All right. So what I want to do about that is, first of all, the easiest thing to do is let's position it. Well, let's go around front before I do that. Let me position it right there on that one. Let me make sure I did the right thing. All right, so I got it positioned right over this one. And I'm going to go in edit component mode. Now this time, I want to make sure I'm below below the lamb's tug, below the socket, and also below, this time, I want to go below the mortise. So let me select everything like that. And now I'm going to bring it down along the blue to that point. And you will notice that I have two legs, one on top of the other. And let me move. Let's see which one this is. This is the one where I made it unique, front leg number 1. I'm going to move that out of the way. Notice the original one is still there. And this one's the same. It's a copy of this one. Well, it's not a copy of that one. It's a copy of this one modified to look like this one. And that's all I had to do to create that leg, and I can now use it in this model. So, using the select tool judiciously, knowing when to use left to right selection, or right to left selection, can really help you in changing the length of things, recreating parts that are similar but dimensionally different. Even if they have complex curves in them, you can use these tricks. So I hope this demo gave you a little more insight into SketchUp, and I hope it's provided you with some tricks that are useful and handy. And we'll see if we can come up with some new ones for next week. Until then, we'll see you. Have a good week.